Jack Calloway had two rules: keep his daughter safe, keep the past buried. For 15 years, he'd lived by them, worked his Montana farm with calloused hands, raised Emily alone after cancer took his wife, let his neighbors whisper about the scars he never explained and the nightmares he never discussed. The past stayed buried until Victor D'Angelo's loan sharks came to collect. They found a quiet farmer, they thought, a desperate man drowning in their doctored interest rates, a father they could break with threats against his teenage daughter. They were wrong. Some men can't be broken. They can only be awakened. And Victor D'Angelo just woke up something that should have stayed buried in classified mission reports and unmarked graves. The war for Montana's farm country is about to begin. God help anyone standing between a father and his daughter. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the withering cornfields in shades of amber and gold. Jack Calloway's weathered boots crunched through the dry soil as he made his early morning inspection of the crops. His calloused hands brushed against the brittle stalks, feeling their weakness. 3 generations of Calloways had worked this land, but never had it looked so desperate. Behind him, the screen door of the farmhouse creaked open. Emily, his 17-year-old daughter, stepped out with her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her long blonde hair caught the morning light, reminding Jack so much of Marie it made his chest ache. "Dad, you forgot breakfast again," she called, out, holding up a thermos and wrapped sandwich. Jack managed a tired smile. "Just checking the irrigation system, sweetheart." The lie came easily. He didn't want her to know he'd been up since 3 a.m., worrying about the latest threat letter. Emily jogged over, her sneakers kicking up small clouds of dust. "Mrs. Patterson's giving us a pop quiz in calculus today. I studied all weekend." "That's my girl," Jack said, accepting the thermos. The coffee's warmth seeped into his cold fingers. "Need a ride to school?" "Hannah's mom is picking me up." Emily glanced at the withering crops. "Dad, are we going to lose the farm?" Jack's throat tightened. "Course not. Just a rough patch. You focus on school. That's your job." A car horn honked from the road. Emily gave him a quick hug and ran off, her backpack bouncing. Jack watched until the car disappeared around the bend, then let his shoulders sag. The morning paper stuck out of his back pocket, its headline about another local farm foreclosure feeling like a personal threat. An hour later, Jack pushed open the door of Mary's diner, the bell's cheerful jingle at odds with his mood. In the morning, regulars occupied their usual spots, old-timers nursing coffee, farmers grabbing breakfast before heading to their fields. The conversations died down as he entered, replaced by meaningful glances and whispers. Sarah Miller, who'd waited tables here since Jack was a teenager, hurried over with a coffee pot. "The usual, Jack?" "Just coffee today, Sarah." He settled into a booth by the window, noticing how conversations resumed but quieter, more guarded. Sarah filled his cup, then hesitated. "Heard about Bill Anderson's place?" Jack nodded grimly. Bill's dairy farm had been in his family for 4 generations. Now it sat empty, the no trespassing signs bearing the logo of Victor D'Angelo's investment company. "They're saying he just up and left," Sarah continued, her voice dropping. "Left everything behind. His truck, his dogs. People are talking, Jack. People always talk in small towns. I'm serious." Sarah glanced around nervously. "D'Angelo's people. They're not just businessmen. My cousin works at the bank," she says. She trailed off as the diner's door opened, admitting 2 men in expensive suits who didn't belong in a place like Mary's. Jack watched their reflection in the window as they took a booth near the door. One of them, a hard-faced man with an expensive watch, stared directly at Jack's back. "Be careful, Jack," Sarah whispered, hurrying away. Jack sipped his coffee slowly, listening to fragments of conversation around him. More farms were struggling. The drought had hit everyone hard, but D'Angelo's predatory loans were finishing what nature had started. The town council seemed powerless, or unwilling, to act. After leaving the diner, Jack drove to Riverside Cemetery. The morning dew still clung to the grass as he made his way to Marie's grave, fresh flowers in hand. He knelt beside the simple headstone, replacing last week's withered bouquet. "I messed up, Marie," he whispered, touching the cool granite. "Should have listened to you about that loan. Now everything your father built, everything we worked for," his voice caught. "I don't know how to fix this." The loan had seemed reasonable at first. The drought had devastated their crops, and Emily's medical bills after the accident had drained their savings. D'Angelo's company had offered terms that appeared generous, until they weren't. Interest rates that suddenly doubled, hidden fees that appeared from nowhere, and now the threats. Back at the farm, Jack sat in his study reviewing the mounting bills. The threatening letter from D'Angelo's company lay open on his desk, its legal language barely disguising the menace beneath. The interest rates had become impossible, the payment demands escalating weekly. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window when Jack heard vehicles approaching. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the house, gravel crunching under their tires. Men in dark suits emerged, led by Sal Russo, D'Angelo's favorite enforcer. Jack had seen him around town, always when something bad was about to happen. Jack stepped onto his porch, stance casual but balanced. Years of farming had kept him strong, though his visitors didn't need to know about his other training. "Mr. Calloway," Sal called out, his smile sharp as a knife. "Beautiful property you have here. Shame about the crops." He gestured at the withering fields. "Must be hard watching your family legacy die like this. State your business, Mr. Russo." Sal's smile widened. "Just a friendly reminder about your payment schedule. Mr. D'Angelo is concerned about your recent difficulties." "I'm working on it. Market's been tough." "Market's tough for everyone," Sal interrupted, walking toward the barn. "Nice equipment you have here. Be a shame if something happened to it." He ran a hand along the tractor's side. "Accidents happen all the time on farms." 2 of his men circled the tractor, and suddenly there was a loud crack of breaking metal. Jack's hands clenched. As they systematically damaged the equipment, their actions precise and deliberate. "Oops," Sal said, lighting a cigarette. "Looks like you've got some maintenance issues. Better get those fixed before harvest time." "Oh, wait." He laughed. "You need working equipment to have a harvest, don't you?" Jack remained still, every muscle tense. One of the men smashed the tractor's headlights, glass tinkling on the concrete floor. "Mr. D'Angelo's patience isn't infinite," Sal continued. "You have until the end of the month. After that," he shrugged. "Well, let's just say we'd hate to see anything happen to this beautiful farm. Or your lovely daughter." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jack's combat instinct screamed to act, but he forced himself to remain still. Not yet. Not while Emily could be caught in the crossfire. "I'll have the payment," Jack said, his voice level. "See that you do." Sal flicked his cigarette onto the barn floor. "We'll be in touch." Jack watched them drive away, dust settling in their wake. Only then did he allow his hands to unclench, knuckles white from restraint. The damage to the tractor was significant. Another few $1,000s he didn't have. Emily returned from school to find him attempting repairs. Her eyes widened at the destruction. "Dad? What happened?" "Agricultural accident," Jack said, forcing a smile. "You know how temperamental these old machines can be." "Dad." Emily's voice hardened. "Your knuckles are bleeding." Jack looked down. He'd scraped them, raw gripping a wrench too tight, lost in anger. "Just a scratch, sweetheart. How was that calculus quiz?" Emily clearly wanted to press further but let it drop. "I think I aced it. Mrs. Patterson said my solutions were elegant." "That's my girl." Jack ruffled her hair, ignoring the pain in his hands. "Why don't you start dinner? I'll be in soon." After Emily went inside, Jack leaned against the damaged tractor, exhaustion washing over him. Late that night, after Emily had gone to bed, he pulled out the original loan documents. The terms had seemed straightforward when he'd signed. Monthly payments he could manage, reasonable interest rates. But somehow the paperwork he had now showed different numbers, different conditions. His signature was there, but the details around it had changed like smoke. The next morning, Jack drove into town early to meet with Frank Watson at First National Bank. He'd known Frank for 20 years. Their kids had played together in elementary school. But as Jack laid out his situation, Frank's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Jack," Frank said, shuffling papers on his desk. "Your credit score. There are some concerning marks here. Multiple missed payments, defaults." "That's impossible," Jack protested. "I've never missed a payment in my life. These records say otherwise." Frank turned his monitor so Jack could see. "And there's a flag here. It says you're under investigation for financial fraud." Jack stared at the screen in disbelief. "Frank, you know me. You know that's not true." "My hands are tied, Jack." The system. Jack stood up, his chair scraping back. "Or D'Angelo." Frank wouldn't meet his eyes. "I think we're done here." That evening, Jack sat in his darkened study reviewing his options. There weren't many. D'Angelo had systematically cut off every legitimate avenue of escape. The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence, followed by Emily's startled scream from the living room. Jack burst in to find her backing away from a brick on the floor, surrounded by fragments of window glass. A note was wrapped around it, held by a rubber band. Emily's hands shook as she picked it up. "Don't," Jack said sharply, taking it from her. The message was simple. "Time's running out. Pay or pray." Emily's voice was small. "Dad, what's really going on?" Jack stared at the broken window, at the darkness beyond where enemies waited. The time for negotiation was over. He'd tried to play by their rules, tried to protect Emily from the truth. But now, "Pack a bag," he said quietly. "We're going to stay with your Aunt Susan for a few days while I get this sorted out." "But school, Emily." His tone made her stop. "Pack, now." As Emily hurried upstairs, Jack walked to his bedroom closet. Behind the hanging clothes, behind the false wall, he'd installed years ago, a metal box waited. Inside lay the tools of his former life. Tools he'd prayed he'd never need again. But D'Angelo had made his choice. Now Jack would make his. The bathroom mirror reflected a face Jack hardly recognized anymore. Blood from his split knuckles dripped into the white sink as he cleaned the wounds, each drop a reminder of his restraint when Sal's men had vandalized his tractor. The first aid kit lay open on the counter, its contents arranged with military precision. Old habits that never quite died. Steam from the hot water clouded the mirror, and Jack wiped it clear with his forearm, revealing the network of scars across his torso. Some were surgical, neat and precise. Others were ragged memories of less careful field medicine. The sealed trident tattoo on his shoulder, usually hidden beneath his farmer's tan and work shirts, seemed to mock his attempts at a peaceful life. "Thought you were done with all this," he muttered to his reflection, applying antiseptic to his knuckles with practiced efficiency. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, Emily's footsteps trying to be quiet. Jack quickly pulled on his shirt, covering the evidence of his former life. "You can come in, sweetheart, just cleaning up a bit." Emily pushed the door open, concern etched on her face. "I heard you up. It's almost midnight. Just a few scrapes from fixing the tractor." He forced a smile, but Emily's eyes were fixed on the precise arrangement of medical supplies. "Nobody organizes a first aid kit like that, Dad." She leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "And I found something in the attic today." Jack's hands stilled. "You were cleaning up there?" "Looking for Mom's old photo albums." Emily's voice wavered slightly. "Found a locked chest instead. Military grade, according to Google, like the ones they use for weapon transport." Jack carefully repacked the first aid kit, buying time. "Lots of surplus equipment ends up on farms." "With a Navy SEAL logo?" Emily pulled something from her pocket, a brass key. "It was behind Mom's picture in the hall. Took me 3 hours to find it." Jack's throat tightened. Marie had known about the key, his emergency backup if things went wrong. She'd never approved of his contingency plans. but she'd understood the necessity. Emily, there are medals in there, Dad. Combat photos. Citations with half the words blacked out. Her voice cracked. Were you ever going to tell me? Jack sat heavily on the edge of the bathtub. It was another life. One I left behind when your mother got sick. But the past needs to stay in the past. His tone was gentle but firm. Those medals, those photos, they're from a different man, a different time. Emily's eyes glistened. Does this have anything to do with what's happening now? With the men who broke our tractor? No, Jack lied smoothly. Just business troubles, nothing more. He stood, kissing her forehead. It's late. You have school tomorrow. The next evening, they sat across from each other at dinner, the silence broken only by the clinking of forks against plates. Emily pushed her food around, clearly bursting with questions she was trying to hold back. Your college applications, Jack said, desperate to steer the conversation to safer ground. Have you decided on your top choices? Really? Emily set down her fork. You're going to deflect with college talk? Emily, I saw the combat medals, Dad. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, 3 of them. She took a shaky breath. The pictures. You looked so different. Younger, but that's not it. Your eyes. That's enough. Jack's voice carried an edge of command he hadn't used in years. Emily flinched slightly, and he immediately regretted his tone. Please. Some things are better left in the past. Later that night, Jack drove to Sheriff Tom Briggs's house on the outskirts of town. He bypassed the front door, walking around to where light spilled from the garage. Tom was there, working on his restored Mustang, his retirement project. Little, late for a social call, Tom said without looking up from the engine. Need to talk, Tom. Jack closed the garage door behind him. About D'Angelo, Tom straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Figured you'd show up eventually. Carol, we've got company. Tom's wife Carol appeared from the house, carrying a plate of cookies. Her smile faded when she saw Jack's expression. Oh, one of those talks. She set down the cookies. Want me to put on coffee? Actually, Tom said gently. Might be better if you give us a minute, honey. Carol nodded but paused at the door. Just be careful. Both of you. Not like those days in the Gulf. After she left, Tom's friendly demeanor hardened. You're not thinking of doing anything stupid, are you? Define stupid. You know exactly what I mean. Tom leaned against his workbench. D'Angelo's got half the county in his pocket. Judges, commissioners, bankers, and the sheriff's department? Tom's jaw tightened. I'm clean, but I'm also outnumbered. 2 of my deputies are on his payroll for sure, maybe more. I need information, Tom, about his operation. No. Tom shook his head firmly. You've got a daughter to think about, a life you built. Don't throw it away playing hero. They're going to take my farm. Then let them take it. Tom's voice rose. It's just land, Jack. Emily needs her father more than she needs the inheritance. Jack turned to leave, but Tom grabbed his arm. I mean it, Jack. Don't make me choose between our friendship and my badge. The next morning, Jack noticed the surveillance immediately. 2 men in a black sedan parked at the end of his road, poorly concealing their camera equipment. Another pair watched from the diner parking lot as he drove past, making crude jokes about Farmer Boy through their open window. In town, a familiar face caught his attention. Luke Reaper Malone stood outside the hardware store, examining garden tools with far too much interest for a man Jack knew had never grown so much as a houseplant. Their eyes met briefly. Anyone watching would have seen 2 strangers passing on the street. But the minimal nod they exchanged carried years of shared history, of missions too classified to discuss. Later that afternoon, Emily was in the attic again, ostensibly organizing old boxes. Jack knew she was really searching for more clues about his past. She found them too. Newspaper clippings about military operations with crucial details redacted, photographs of younger versions of her father in far-off places with men whose faces were now carved on memorial walls. Jack watched her from the doorway as she pieced together fragments of his history. Part of him wanted to tell her everything, to explain why he'd chosen this quiet life, why he'd hidden so much from her. But the weight of classified operations and old promises kept him silent. The decision was taken from his hands when he checked the mail. Mixed in with bills and advertisements was a large manila envelope. Inside were surveillance photos, Jack and Emily going about their daily routines. Emily at school, Jack working the fields, Emily with her friends at the local pizza place. Jack at the diner. The message was clear. We're watching. We can reach you anywhere. That evening, Jack sat alone in his study, an old team photo spread before him. Young faces grinned back at the camera, unaware that half of them wouldn't make it home. His finger traced familiar features. Mike, lost, in Kandahar. Dave, who bled out in his arms during an extraction gone wrong. Sam, who made it home but lost his battle with demons no one could see. I chose this life for her, he whispered to the ghosts in the photograph. Chose peace. Stability. His hand clenched. But they're not giving me a choice anymore. A car crunched up the gravel driveway, headlights sweeping across the wall. Jack moved to the window, watching a sleek black Mercedes park beside his weathered pickup truck. 3 men emerged, 2 large security types and a thin man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. The doorbell rang. Emily started to answer it, but Jack gestured her back. Go to your room, he said quietly. Lock the door. Don't come out until I call you. Dad. Now, Emily. He waited until he heard her door close before opening the front door. The thin man smiled, all perfect teeth and predatory eyes. Mr. Calloway. I'm Gerald Wright, legal counsel for Mr. D'Angelo's investment firm. He held up his briefcase. May we come in? We have some matters to discuss. Jack noted the bulges under the security men's jackets, poorly concealed weapons. Let's talk on the porch. Wright's smile tightened. I'm afraid these documents are rather sensitive. Inside would be better. The porch, Jack repeated firmly, or not at all. A flash of annoyance crossed Wright's face, but he nodded. The security men positioned themselves on either side of him as he opened his briefcase. Mr. D'Angelo has been very patient, Wright began, producing a thick document. But given your continued failure to meet the updated payment schedule, he's prepared to initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings. Updated payment schedule? Jack's voice was dangerously quiet. You mean the one your company illegally modified after I signed? Wright's smile never wavered. I have here the original documents with your signature, Mr. Calloway. The terms are quite clear. Of course, Mr. D'Angelo is willing to be generous, if you're willing to be reasonable. Reasonable? Sign over the mineral rights to your property. Mr. D'Angelo's geological surveys suggest significant natural gas deposits beneath your land. In exchange, he'll extend your payment deadline by 6 months. Jack studied the men carefully. Wright was the talker, but the security men were the real threat, ex-military based on their stance but not special forces. Their weapons were visible enough to be intimidating, but positioned wrong for quick draws. All for show then, meant to scare a simple farmer. And if I refuse, Wright's smile finally faded. Then things will become uncomfortable for everyone. His eyes flicked toward Emily's bedroom window. It would be a shame if your daughter's college prospects were affected by, say, a drug possession charge. Small-town police can be so zealous about campus safety. Jack's hands itched to violence, but he kept them relaxed at his sides. I'll need time to review the documents. 24 hours. Wright placed the papers on a porch chair. I suggest you make the smart choice, Mr. Calloway, for your daughter's sake. They left as precisely as they'd arrived, the Mercedes' engine purring down the driveway. Jack watched until their taillights disappeared, then went inside and called Emily down. She emerged from her room pale but composed. I heard everything. Emily. No more lies, Dad. Her voice was steady despite her trembling hands. No more protecting me from the truth. What are we going to do? Jack looked at his daughter, no longer the little girl he'd tried so hard to shield, but a young woman facing reality with clear eyes. Marie would be proud. "First," he said, "we're going to get through this. Together." He picked up the documents Wright had left. "And then we're going to show Mr. D'Angelo exactly who he's dealing with." Emily hugged him fiercely. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise. You'll tell me the whole story someday. About the medals, the photos, all of it." Jack held his daughter close, remembering other promises. Other lives. "Someday," he said softly. "When this is over." But as Emily went to bed that night, Jack knew the time for hiding his past was ending. D'Angelo's escalating threats had forced his hand. The peaceful farmer would need to make way for the warrior he'd tried to bury. In his bedroom, Jack opened his closet and pulled out the false back panel. The metal box was still there, untouched for years. Inside lay the tools and weapons of his former life, preserved in cosmoline and memories. "Just a little longer," he whispered, replacing the panel. But he left the box unlocked. Soon, very soon, the past would need to be unleashed. Outside, crickets chirped in the darkness, and somewhere in town, Victor D'Angelo's men watched and waited, unaware they were poking a sleeping giant. The war was coming. Jack could feel it, in his bones, in the old scars that ached before rain, in the combat instincts that had never truly gone dormant. He just hoped Emily would forgive him for what he'd have to become. Dawn painted the horizon in shades of blood red. As Jack made his way to the cattle pasture, something felt wrong. The morning air was too quiet. No lowing from the herd, no morning bird calls, just silence. He found the first dead cow near the water trough. No signs of struggle, no wounds. 3 more lay nearby, bodies already starting to bloat in the morning heat. Jack knelt beside the water trough, dipping his fingers in but not touching the liquid. A faint chemical smell hung in the air. Professional-grade poison, not some random act of vandalism. "Bastards," he whispered, pulling out his phone to call the vet. But he already knew what she'd say. The poison would be untraceable. The deaths, ruled as natural causes. Another accident to add to his mounting losses. The phone rang in his hand. Unknown number. Jack answered without speaking. Heavy breathing filled the line, followed by recorded screams. Women begging, children crying, men's voices breaking under torture. The sounds brought back memories of interrogation rooms and black sites, places that officially didn't exist. "Sweet dreams, farmer." A digitally altered voice whispered before the line went dead. The calls continued throughout the day. Every hour, like clockwork. Sometimes just breathing. Sometimes more screams. Sometimes a child crying for her father. Jack knew the game. Sleep deprivation, psychological warfare, breaking down resistance through constant tension. Emily's school called, around noon. "Mr. Calloway, this is Principal Roberts. We've noticed some concerning individuals watching the school grounds. They seem particularly interested in the students." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "I'll pick her up. Actually, several teachers have reported men following Emily between classes. We've contacted the police, but they say without direct evidence of threatening behavior." "I'll be there in 10 minutes. The drive to school gave Jack time to notice he was being followed. Black SUV, 2 men inside, maintaining perfect surveillance distance. They weren't trying to hide. They wanted him to know he was being watched. Emily was waiting in the principal's office, trying to look brave, but fear showed in her eyes. "I'm fine, Dad. Really." "Emily." Principal Roberts cleared her throat. "Perhaps you should tell your father about what happened in the parking lot." Emily's composure cracked slightly. "It was nothing. Just some guys asking questions about you. About the farm." "What exactly did they ask?" Jack kept his voice gentle. "If you ever talked about Mr. D'Angelo, if you had any special training, if..." She swallowed. "If I knew what happened to my mom." The drive home was tense. Jack took alternate routes watching for tails, mind racing through contingency plans. Emily stared out the window, uncharacteristically quiet. The brake lines, she said suddenly. What? Check the brake lines. Emily's voice was small. I heard those men talking. One of them said something about making it look natural. Jack pulled over immediately. Sure enough, a small pool of brake fluid stained the pavement under his truck. The line had been cut with surgical precision, not enough to fail immediately, but guaranteed to give out at high speed. How did you know to listen for that? Jack asked as they waited for a tow truck. Emily hugged herself. I've been reading about surveillance, counterintelligence. There are websites. Emily, I'm not stupid, Dad. Those men at school? They weren't just asking questions. They were sending a message. To you. The tow truck driver was a stranger, recently hired by the local garage. Jack noted his too-new uniform, the way he kept touching his pocket where a phone bulged. Taking photos, probably, reporting their movements. That afternoon, Emily walked to her friend Hannah's house to study. She took the same route she always did, past the Wilsons' farm and the old Peterson place. Jack watched from the porch until she disappeared around the bend. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. Emily's ringtone. Dad? Her voice shook. There are men following me. 3 of them. They're... A sharp intake of breath. They're getting closer. Where are you? The old feed store. Dad, I'm scared. Find somewhere public now. I can't. They're blocking. The sound of running footsteps. Heavy breathing. Dad! Jack was already moving, truck forgotten, sprinting down the road. His body fell into combat rhythm, controlling breathing, conserving energy, mind calculating angles and approaches. He heard Emily before he saw her. Running footsteps, harsh breathing. 3 men in dark clothes pursuing her, herding her toward a waiting van. Emily saw him coming and changed direction. 1 man reached for her. Jack's training took over. The first man went down to a throat strike. The second caught an elbow to the temple. The third pulled a knife, slashing with professional form. Jack blocked, trapped the arm, and dislocated the shoulder in one fluid motion. Run home, he told Emily. Now. She hesitated for just a moment, then sprinted away. Jack turned back to the men. The knife wielder was trying to stand, cradling his useless arm. Tell Victor this ends now. The man spat blood. This is just the beginning, soldier boy. We know what you are now, what you were. Jack's voice went cold. Then you should be very afraid. He left them groaning in the dirt and jogged home. Emily was waiting on the porch, shaking but unhurt. She flew into his arms. Where did you learn to... Later, Jack said, leading her inside. Pack a bag. You're staying with Aunt Susan for a while. I'm not leaving you! This isn't a discussion. Jack was already pulling out his phone. Those men will be back, with friends. Emily's voice hardened. Then we face them together. Emily. No, I'm tired of running, tired of being scared. She squared her shoulders. Teach me to defend myself, please. Jack studied his daughter, Marie's determination shining in her eyes. It won't be easy. I don't care. Instead of answering, Jack walked to his truck and pulled out a map. I need to see someone first, an old friend who might be able to help. Reaper. Jack looked up sharply. Emily gave a tiny shrug. I saw his name in some of those files. He was on your team, right? The drive to Luke Reaper Malone's cabin took 2 hours, mostly on unmarked forest roads. Emily dozed in the passenger seat while Jack watched for tails. None appeared. They'd shaken. Their surveillance for now. Reaper's cabin perched on a ridge overlooking the valley. No vehicles visible, but Jack spotted the cameras hidden in the trees. He parked in plain view and waited. Long minutes passed. Finally, a shadow detached itself from the tree line. Reaper looked exactly as he had in their Special Forces days. Lean, hard, eyes that missed nothing. You're getting sloppy, Jack, he called out. Saw you coming 10 minutes ago. Getting old. Aren't we all? Reaper's eyes flicked to Emily. This your girl? Emily stepped forward, hand extended. Emily Calloway. Ma'am. Reaper shook her hand, then turned to Jack. You wouldn't be here unless things were bad. D'Angelo's men made a move on Emily today. Reaper's expression darkened. Inside, both of you. The cabin's interior was sparse but professional. Communications gear, weapons lockers poorly disguised as furniture, screens showing security feeds. Emily's eyes widened as she took it all in. You've been keeping tabs, Jack said. Reaper poured 3 cups of coffee. D'Angelo's been busy, moving into new territories, buying politicians, making problems disappear, building an empire. With stolen money from farmers like Dad, Emily added. Reaper's eyebrows rose. Smart girl. Too smart. Jack sipped his coffee. They'll keep coming, won't they? Count on it. Reaper pulled up files on a laptop. D'Angelo's got ex-military, contractors on payroll, professional hitters disguised as loan collectors, even some former intelligence assets. Jesus. Gets worse. Remember those mineral rights they wanted? There's natural gas under half the county. Worth billions if they can force enough people off their land. Emily leaned forward. So it's not just about the loans. Never was, honey. Reaper looked at Jack. You know what has to happen. Jack set down his cup. I made promises. To Marie. To myself. And how's that working out? Reaper's voice was gentle, but firm. They're not giving you a choice anymore, brother. Question is, you remember how to dance? Like riding a bike. Jack couldn't quite keep the edge from his voice. Good. Reaper stood. Because this isn't just about your farm anymore. D'Angelo's organization, they're into everything. Drugs, trafficking, money laundering, using legitimate businesses as fronts. People who resist tend to disappear. Emily touched her father's arm. Like Bill Anderson? Smart girl, Reaper said. Again. Yeah, like Anderson, and a dozen others across 3 states. Jack paced the cabin. I can't just walk away, let them take everything. No one's saying walk away. Reaper opened a gun safe. I'm saying hit back. Hard enough they'll wish they never heard the name Calloway. It would mean going back to that life. Being that person again. Dad. Emily's voice was soft but determined. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. Jack looked at his daughter, seeing Marie's strength, his own determination. You understand what this means? Once we start down this road, I understand they tried to hurt me today, to get to you. Emily's jaw set. I understand they've hurt other families, destroyed other lives. Someone has to stop them. Reaper cleared his throat. Question is, you ready for what that means? Really ready? Instead of answering, Jack walked to the gun safe. Inside, nestled in foam, lay a familiar shape. His old combat knife, the one he'd given Reaper for safekeeping years ago. I need intel, he said quietly. Everything you have on D'Angelo's, operation, personnel, locations, security, already compiled. Reaper handed him a thumb drive. Been waiting for this day. They're watching the farm. Got a safe house you can use, off the grid. Time to train, plan, prepare. Emily stepped forward. Train me too. Both men turned to her. She lifted her chin. I need to be able to protect myself. Help fight back. Jack started to protest, but Reaper cut him off. She's right. They'll use her against you every chance they get. Better she knows how to handle herself. Later, driving back in the gathering darkness, Emily broke the long silence. I'm not afraid, Dad. You should be. Jack kept his eyes on the road. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. Is that what they taught you? In the SEALs? Among other things. Emily was quiet for a moment. Those men today, you could have killed them easily. Yes, but you didn't. Jack glanced at his daughter. There's a line. Once you cross it, it changes you. Everything we do from here on out, we do to protect ourselves and others, not for revenge. They drove on through the night, father and daughter, while behind them Reaper's cabin disappeared into the darkness. Ahead lay war, but also truth. No more secrets. No more hiding. The feed store was dark. As they passed it, the place where everything had changed just hours ago, Emily squared her shoulders, and Jack felt a fierce pride. She was Marie's daughter, but she was his too. A warrior's blood ran in her veins. Tomorrow, they would begin. Training, planning, preparing for the storm to come. But tonight, they were simply father and daughter, driving home through the darkness, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The digital clock read 4:30 a.m. when Jack slipped out of bed, muscles aching from yesterday's confrontation. Old habits resurfaced easily, checking sightlines through windows, noting ambient sounds, cataloging potential threats. His body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. In the pre-dawn darkness, Jack began his workout routine. Push-ups, pull-ups on the barn beam, burpees until sweat soaked his shirt. Combat fitness was different from farm strength. He needed both now. Emily found him doing one-armed planks in the barn. She watched silently, noting how different he looked, not just physically, but in his bearing, his focus. "Teach me," she said simply. Jack lowered himself to the floor. "It's not just exercise. This life, this training, it changes you." "I'm already changed." Emily's voice was firm. They made sure of that. And so it began. Each morning, father and daughter trained together as the sun rose over the withering cornfields. Jack taught her the fundamentals: proper stance, breathing, control, situational awareness. Emily absorbed everything with intense focus, reminding Jack so much of himself during SEAL training that it hurt. Between training sessions, Jack walked his property with new eyes. The old fence line became a perimeter to monitor. The slight rise behind the barn, perfect for observation. The drainage ditch along the north field, a potential approach route to defend. While fixing broken fence posts, he mentally mapped fields of fire and fallback positions. Every task became an opportunity for tactical preparation. He installed new floodlights, positioning them to create shadowed areas, places where an observer would think they were hidden while actually being perfectly exposed. Emily noticed the changes in her father as the days passed. The farmer's slouch disappeared, replaced by a warrior's readiness. He moved differently, economical, precise, always aware of his surroundings. Sometimes she caught him staring into the distance, hands unconsciously moving through weapon drills with fence posts or tools. "Your stance is too wide," he told her one morning as they practiced basic self-defense. "Closer together. Bend your knees more." Emily adjusted, throwing the punch again. Jack nodded approval. "Better. Remember, it's not about strength. It's about speed and leverage," Emily finished, "using their momentum against them." "Good." Jack demonstrated the next movement. "Now, if someone grabs you from behind," they trained for hours each day, Emily's soft hands growing calloused, her movements becoming sharper, more confident. Jack taught her how to break holds, escape restraints, use everyday objects as weapons. More importantly, he taught her how to think tactically, to always have an escape route, to never let herself be cornered. While Emily was at school, Jack installed hidden cameras around the property. He disguised them as broken equipment, weathered wood, anything that wouldn't draw attention. The feeds ran to monitors in the barn's hayloft, which he'd converted into a makeshift command center. Victor's men were still watching. Jack spotted their surveillance teams easily now that he was looking for them. But they were sloppy, overconfident. They didn't notice him studying their patterns, identifying their weaknesses. One morning, Jack discovered fresh vandalism to the farmhouse. Broken windows, spray-painted threats. But instead of cleaning it up immediately, he watched. Noted how the vandals had approached, what paths they'd taken, where they'd positioned their lookouts. "They're getting bolder," Emily said, examining the damage. "Good." Jack's voice was calm. "The bolder they get, the more mistakes they'll make." During a supply run to town, Jack instantly spotted the tail vehicle. Dark sedan, 2 men inside. Instead of trying to lose them, he used their surveillance against them, leading them on a winding route that revealed their procedures, their response times, their radio protocols. Emily helped him map it all out. Surveillance positions, patrol patterns, communication schedules. She had a knack for analysis that surprised and worried him. This wasn't the future he'd wanted for her, but she took to it naturally. Sheriff Tom increased his patrols past the farm, making it obvious for anyone watching. But in quiet moments, he slipped Jack information about D'Angelo's operation. Guard rotations, vehicle descriptions, which officers were on the payroll. "Be careful with this," Tom warned, passing a thick envelope during a seemingly casual conversation about farm equipment. "Some of it came from inside their organization. If they trace it." "They won't," Jack assured him, tucking the envelope away. That evening, Jack began positioning supply caches around the property. Medical kits, weapons, ammunition, all carefully weatherproofed and hidden. Emily helped, her smaller hands better, at concealing things in tight spaces. "Like Easter egg hunting," she joked, but her eyes were serious. "Just with higher stakes." Jack was checking the barn's sightlines when Emily found him late one night. She stood in the doorway, watching him, move through knife drills in the moonlight. His movements were fluid, lethal, nothing like the farmer she'd known all her life. "You look different," she said quietly. Jack paused mid-motion. "Different how?" Like you're finally not pretending anymore." Emily stepped closer. "All these years, you were playing a role. Being what you thought I needed. Emily, but this is really you, isn't it? The warrior, not the farmer." Jack lowered the knife. "Both are me. The farmer is who I chose to be, for you and your mother. The warrior. That's who I have to be now, to protect what matters." Emily touched the knife's handle hesitantly. "Will you teach me?" "Not yet." Jack sheathed the blade. "First, you master the basics. Everything else follows." The barn became their command center. Jack installed radio equipment, surveillance monitors, and maps of the county marked with D'Angelo's known operations. Emily helped organize intelligence files, cross-referencing information from different sources. "Look at this," she said one evening, spreading out documents. "Their patrol routes changed last week. They're leaving gaps here and here." She pointed to locations on the map. Jack studied the pattern. "Good catch. They're either getting sloppy, or it's a trap," Emily finished. "Trying to tempt us into using those routes." "Smart girl." Jack squeezed her shoulder proudly. "Always assume it's a trap, then figure out how to turn it against them." They worked late into the night, planning, preparing, transforming the farm into a fortress while making it appear unchanged to watching eyes. Every new security measure was carefully concealed. Tripwires hidden in tall grass, cameras disguised as broken equipment, observation posts that looked like routine maintenance projects. "Remember," Jack told Emily as they concealed another cache, "the best defenses are the ones they never see coming." One morning, Jack found Emily practicing kicks in the barn. Her form was good, balanced, controlled, each strike precise. She'd been training on her own, he realized, preparing for what they both knew was coming. "Your rear foot's turning too much," he said, making her jump. "Keeps you from pivoting effectively." Emily adjusted her stance. "Better? Better." Jack watched her move through the sequence again. "You know this isn't a game, right? This isn't some action movie training montage." "I know." Emily's voice was steady. "They tried to hurt me to get to you. They've hurt other families. This is about survival." Jack nodded slowly. "Okay, then let's do it right." They trained harder after that. Jack taught her the real skills: how to move silently, how to use terrain to advantage, how to think 3 steps ahead in a fight. Emily absorbed it all, her movements becoming more fluid, more confident. "You're a natural," Jack said one evening as they cleaned up training equipment. "Mom would hate this," Emily replied quietly. "Me learning to fight. Becoming whatever I'm becoming. Your mother." Jack paused, choosing his words carefully. She hated violence, but she understood necessity. She knew sometimes you have to fight to protect what matters. The days fell into a rhythm. Training at dawn, school for Emily, Surveillance and preparation for Jack. More training in the evening. Planning and intelligence work at night. They were building something. Not just defenses, but a partnership. Father and daughter becoming a team. Sheriff Tom brought more information when he could. Reaper checked in regularly, adding his expertise to their preparations. But mostly it was just the two of them, working in quiet synchronization, preparing for the storm they both knew was coming. One evening, Jack found Emily studying old photos of his SEAL team. "They're all operators, aren't they?" she asked. "In town. The way they move, the way they watch things, like you used to." "Good eye." Jack sat beside her. "Most of them are ex-military, private contractors now. That's why you're being so careful. Why we're preparing so much." "These aren't thugs with baseball bats," Jack confirmed. "They're trained, dangerous, which means we have to be better." Emily traced the old photo with her finger. "We will be." The transformation of the farm continued. Every day brought new preparations, new contingencies, new layers of security. Jack used his military experience and Emily's fresh perspective to create a defensive network that looked like nothing more than routine farm maintenance to outside observers. But beneath the surface, everything was changing. The barn became an armory and command center. The fields became killing grounds with preset fields of fire. The farmhouse itself became a hard point, with escape routes and fallback positions carefully planned. "Remember," Jack told Emily as they finished another set of preparations, "the goal isn't to fight them head-on, it's to control the battlefield, make them fight where and how we choose." Emily nodded, understanding. She was changing too, growing stronger, more focused, more aware. The naive farmer's daughter was becoming something else, something harder. Jack saw it happening and felt both proud and sad. One night he found her practicing with his combat knife, moving through the forms he'd shown her with fluid grace. She saw him watching and stopped, embarrassed. "I couldn't sleep," she explained. "Kept thinking about them out there, watching us, planning." "Let them plan," Jack said quietly. "Let them think they have us figured out. Their overconfidence is our advantage." Emily returned the knife to its sheath. "Do you ever regret it, leaving that life behind?" "Never." Jack's answer was immediate. "I chose this life. You, the farm, peace. And I'd choose it again. But sometimes life doesn't give us choices. Sometimes it only gives us necessity." They stood together in the moonlight, father and daughter, warrior and student, watching the darkness beyond their farm where enemies waited. But they weren't afraid anymore. They were ready. The quiet before the storm was ending. Soon, very soon, D'Angelo's men would make their move. But when they did, they wouldn't find a simple farmer and his daughter. They would find warriors waiting in the dark. The security monitor flickered in the darkened barn as Jack watched 4 black SUVs approach his property. No headlights, professional spacing. They'd waited for a moonless night thinking darkness would be their ally. "Grid 3 is active," Emily's voice came through his earpiece. She was in the command center they'd built in the hayloft, monitoring the sensor network. 8 heat signatures moving along the fence line. "Acknowledged." Jack adjusted his night vision goggles. "Status on the house cameras?" 2 more teams approaching from the east. They're being careful using cover. A pause. "Dad, these aren't the usual thugs. They're movement patterns, military formations," Jack confirmed. "They've brought in their professionals." He smiled grimly in the darkness. "Good." The past weeks of preparation were about to be tested. Every trap, every sensor, every defensive position had been meticulously planned for this moment. Jack moved silently through the darkness, his boots making no sound on the damp grass. The first team reached the edge of the cornfield. Through his night vision, Jack watched them check their weapons, MP5 submachine guns with suppressors. This wasn't meant to be a warning. They'd come to eliminate him. "Contact in 30 seconds, Emily reported. "Perimeter sensors show they're converging. On the barn." "Acknowledged." Jack touched the detonator in his pocket. "Execute pattern alpha on my mark." The lead team entered the cornfield, moving in standard search formation. Jack counted down in his head. 3, 2, 1. Mark. The pre-positioned. Flashbangs detonated in sequence, creating a cascade of light and sound that destroyed the attacker's night vision. Disoriented shouts filled the air as the men stumbled, temporarily blind and deaf. Jack moved. Years of training took over as he flowed through the darkness like a ghost. The first man went down to a precise strike to the vagus nerve. The second caught an elbow to the temple before he could raise his weapon. Southeast team is redirecting, Emily reported calmly. They're trying to flank your position. Let them. Jack zip-tied the unconscious men quickly. Status on the house. Team? Still holding position. They're waiting for confirmation from the barn team. Jack smiled. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The farmhouse was a fortress now, but they'd let D'Angelo's men think it was vulnerable. Meanwhile, the real trap was closing. A burst of suppressed gunfire erupted from the eastern approach. Jack ducked behind a tractor as rounds pinged off metal. 4 shooters, Emily reported. Grid 5. They're maintaining discipline using cover and fire tactics. Time to change the game. Jack pressed another detonator. Hidden sprinklers burst to life, but instead of water, they sprayed a mixture of farm chemicals, harmless but overwhelming to enhanced vision devices. The shooting became erratic as the attackers' expensive night vision gear betrayed them. Jack moved again, flowing from shadow to shadow. These men were good, ex-military for sure, but they were fighting blind now. He took them down methodically, using non-lethal techniques that would leave them with nothing worse than bruises and wounded pride. "Boss, we can't see shit," one man shouted into his radio. "Miller's team is down, no response from—" Jack's strike to the solar plexus cut him off mid-sentence. The radio clattered to the ground, still broadcasting. "Pick it up," Jack ordered the next man he disabled. "Tell them exactly what I say." The man hesitated, then complied as Jack applied pressure to a nerve cluster. "Team 3 reporting," he gasped into the radio. "The target, he's not what we thought. He's—" Jack supplied the next words, which the man repeated. "He's been playing us. Tell Mr. D'Angelo. He brought a knife to a gunfight." "What the hell does that mean?" The response crackled. "Report status. It means," Jack took the radio using his natural voice, "that you should have done better research before threatening a SEAL's family." Silence filled the channel. Then, "Who is this?" "The farmer you've been harassing. The one you thought would be an easy target." Jack cable-tied the last conscious attacker. "Check your men's body cameras. I want your boss to see exactly what happened here." More silence. Then multiple vehicles started up in the distance, the backup teams rapidly withdrawing. "Dad?" Emily's voice held a mix of concern and pride. "The remaining teams are bugging out, fast." "Good." Jack surveyed the scene. 8 professional operators lay secured and unconscious around him. No serious injuries, but they'd wake up very, sore and very humbled. "Call Sheriff Tom. Tell him he's about to find some interesting evidence at the station." An hour later, Jack watched from the shadows as Tom's deputies collected the zip-tied men from where he'd deposited them in front of the police station. Their weapons, all illegal, all with serial numbers filed off, were neatly stacked beside them. "Evidence of illegal weapons," Emily mused from the command center. "That'll cause problems for D'Angelo's organization." More than that. Jack headed back to the barn. Those body cameras recorded everything, including them attacking a civilian farm with military hardware. Emily met him in the barn, her face flushed with excitement and relief. "I've never seen anything like it. The way you moved, how you used their own tactics against them." "We used their tactics against them," Jack corrected. "Your monitoring made it possible. We're a team." Emily hugged him fiercely. "Think they'll back off now?" "No." Jack's voice hardened. "This was just the first test. D'Angelo will analyze everything that happened tonight. Next time, they'll be better prepared." "Yes." Jack began checking his equipment, cleaning and storing each piece. "But now they know what they're dealing with. Fear will make them cautious." "And sloppy?" "Eventually." Jack smiled grimly. Desperate men make mistakes. The next morning, local news vans clustered around the police station. The discovery of armed men with military equipment had sparked a firestorm of questions. Who were they? Who did they work for? Why were they targeting a local farm? Jack watched the coverage on the command center's monitors. The reporters were asking the right questions, digging into D'Angelo's business dealings, his connections to private military contractors. "Look at this," Emily said, pointing to her laptop. Anonymous posts were appearing on local message boards, exposing details of D'Angelo's operation. Financial records, shell companies, patterns of intimidation and violence. "Someone's been busy," Jack observed. Emily looked slightly guilty. "I may have spent some time on encryption and data distribution techniques. The internet is a powerful tool for asymmetric warfare." "Careful," Jack warned. "Digital tracks can be followed. Not if you know what you're doing." Emily's smile was pure mischief. "Besides, people deserve to know the truth about D'Angelo." The truth was spreading faster than D'Angelo's damage control could contain it. By afternoon, state police were asking questions about the illegal weapons. Federal agencies were showing interest in the military equipment. "Sir?" One of the security camera feeds showed a familiar face approaching the farm. "You need to see this." The footage showed Victor D'Angelo himself, watching the morning news coverage from his office. His face was a mask of rage as he threw a crystal tumbler against the wall. "Find out everything about Calloway," he snarled at his assistants. "Military records, combat history, everything. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." "They're already pulling your files," Emily reported, monitoring D'Angelo's network traffic. "Mostly getting redacted documents, but enough to scare them." Jack nodded approvingly. His classified operations would remain secret, but his decorations, his SEAL status, those would tell D'Angelo exactly what kind of hornet's nest he'd kicked. "Send him a message," Jack decided. "Something personal." Emily's fingers flew over her keyboard. Minutes later, D'Angelo's private email pinged. Inside was a detailed dossier on each of the men Jack had defeated, their military records, their current employment, their combat ratings. The message was simple. "Next time, send your best." "Think he'll get the message?" Emily asked. "Oh, he'll get it." Jack began preparing for the inevitable response. "The question is, how will he react?" They didn't have to wait long. By evening, D'Angelo's organization was in chaos. The exposed mercenaries were being disavowed, their connections scrubbed. Local officials were distancing themselves. The carefully constructed facade of legitimate business was cracking. "They're moving money," Emily reported, monitoring financial transactions. "Lots of it, offshore accounts, shell companies." "Preparing for war," Jack translated. "Or preparing to run. Which do you think it'll be? With a man like D'Angelo?" Jack checked his equipment again. War. Definitely war. The next few days brought a flurry of activity. D'Angelo's legitimate businesses underwent sudden personnel changes. Known associates disappeared from public view. Private security companies were contracted, then canceled within hours. "He's reorganizing," Jack explained as they watched the pattern emerge. "Cutting loose anyone who might be compromised. Bringing in new players." Because of one failed attack. Because now he knows what he's facing. Jack pointed to surveillance photos of new men arriving in town. "Look at them. Different caliber of operator. More expensive. More dangerous." Emily studied the images. Ex-special forces? Some of them. Others. Private military contractors. Mercenaries. Jack's expression darkened. Men who don't care about collateral damage. "So what's our next move?" "We wait." Jack began sketching new defensive plans. "Let them make mistakes. Let them underestimate us again. Even though we know they're coming. Especially because we know they're coming." Jack smiled grimly. "The best trap is the one your enemy walks into with eyes wide open." The digital war continued. Every time D'Angelo's people tried to scrub evidence from the internet, new copies appeared. Every attempt to discredit Jack encountered mysterious technical difficulties. Emily's digital skills proved as effective as her father's combat abilities. "They're getting frustrated," she reported, monitoring their communications. "Their usual tactics aren't working." "Good." Jack reviewed the latest intelligence. Frustrated enemies make mistakes. Angry men forget their training. The waiting game stretched on. D'Angelo's organization remained in disarray, unable to effectively counter the combination of physical and digital warfare being waged against them. The simple farmer and his daughter had become a force they couldn't predict or control. "We've changed everything," Emily observed one evening as they monitored the fallout. "They can't operate the way they used to, can't hide behind their usual facades." "That's the real victory," Jack agreed. "Not just defeating their attack, but making them show their true nature." And in his office, Victor D'Angelo watched his carefully built empire begin to crack, all because of one farmer who refused to be broken. One warrior who had emerged from retirement to protect his home. The war was only beginning, but the first battle had been decisively won. Sal Russo sat in D'Angelo's darkened office, scrolling through heavily redacted military files on his tablet. What little remained visible painted a terrifying picture. Distinguished service. Multiple combat deployments. Silver Star. Combat citations with entire paragraphs blacked out. "This isn't just some farmer playing soldier," Sal reported. "Calloway was the real deal. Tier 1 operator." D'Angelo stood at his window watching the city lights below. "You're telling me we've been poking a sleeping lion?" "More like a ghost." Sal pulled up another file. "Most of his operations are still classified, but the pattern, specialized warfare, high-value target elimination, the kind of missions that never officially happened. And now he's using those skills against us." D'Angelo's voice was cold. "Find his weakness." "Already did." Sal opened another window. "Emily Calloway, 17, honor student. Mother died 5 years ago. Cancer. She's everything to him. Get me someone who can grab her quietly. Already made some calls." Sal hesitated. "It'll be expensive. After what happened to our last team, most operators won't touch this job. Money isn't an issue." D'Angelo finally turned from the window. "Break him, whatever it takes." The next morning, Jack received an encrypted message on a channel only a handful of people knew existed. The sender was anonymous, but the warning was clear. Someone inside D'Angelo's organization was talking about Emily. Jack found his daughter at breakfast, studying for a calculus test. She looked up as he entered, instantly alert to his tension. "What's wrong?" "We need to increase your security." Jack sat across from her. "They're shifting focus." Emily's hands tightened around her coffee mug. "They're coming after me." "They'll try." Jack pulled out his phone, bringing up building plans. "We're changing your routes to school. New protocols. No more routine." "I can handle myself now." Emily reminded him. "You trained me. Against street thugs and basic operators, yes. But they'll send professionals this time. Men like I used to be." Emily absorbed this. "So we adapt, like you taught me." They spent the morning running drills, evasion techniques, counter-surveillance, emergency protocols. Emily had become a quick study, but Jack pushed her harder than ever. The stakes were too high for anything less. Local businesses began turning them away. The grocery store claimed their credit cards were declined. The hardware store was mysteriously out of stock. Even the diner where Sarah worked posted a "closed for renovations" sign when they approached. "They're isolating us," Emily observed as another shop owner hurriedly locked his doors. "Cutting off support." "Standard tactics," Jack confirmed. "Pressure the community, make us feel alone." At school, Emily noticed the isolation spreading. Parents kept their children away. Teachers became distant. Her few remaining friends made excuses to avoid her. During lunch, she sat alone until Hannah Parker, her best friend since kindergarten, slid into the seat across from her. "My dad says we're not supposed to talk to you anymore," Hannah whispered. "Says your family is trouble." Emily started to respond, but movement at the cafeteria entrance caught her eye. 2 men in casual clothes trying too hard to look like ordinary parents. Their eyes swept the room with professional precision. Without a word, Emily pulled Hannah under the table as a camera flash went off. "New exit route," she murmured. "Like we practiced." The men were good, But Emily was better prepared. She and Hannah slipped through the kitchen using other students as cover, emerging on the far side of the building. Emily's phone buzzed. A text from her father acknowledging the alert from her panic button. What was that? Hannah asked, trembling. That was them trying to map my routines. Emily squeezed her friend's hand. Thanks for the warning. Now go. You shouldn't be seen with me. Back home, Jack discovered sophisticated listening devices. In the walls, professional grade, military spec. They'd been installed during his absence, showing gaps in their security. They had help, Emily said, examining the devices. Someone gave them building access. Check the staff records, Jack suggested. Look for recent hires. Emily's fingers flew over her laptop. The new maintenance man. His background check was signed off by the same company that handles D'Angelo's. Security screening. Jack nodded grimly. They're getting smarter, more thorough. During a supply run to a neighboring town, Jack spotted the ambush being set up. 3 vehicles, strategically positioned. Men with concealed weapons establishing fields of fire. Instead of avoiding them, he drove straight into their trap. Let them think they had him. Then, at the last moment, he demonstrated exactly why he'd earned those redacted commendations. The resulting chase ended with 2 crashed vehicles and 3 very professional operators learning painful lessons about underestimating their target. Jack left them zip-tied but unharmed, with a message for their employer. Still not your best. But the real attack came that evening. The power went out across 3 blocks, a localized blackout too precise to be accidental. Jack was already moving when Emily's panic button signal went dark. Emily? His voice crackled over their encrypted radio. No response. The house cameras switched to battery backup, showing multiple teams moving with precise coordination. This wasn't a probe or a test. This was a full extraction operation. Jack accessed the command center monitors, watching the assault unfold with professional appreciation. They'd studied his defensive setup, found the blind spots. These were top-tier operators executing a plan weeks in the making. Emily's last known position was the second-floor study. Jack moved through the darkness, every sense alert. The intruders were using subsonic ammunition, sound suppressors, and IR strobes to defeat night vision. Almost perfect tactics. Almost. He found signs of struggle in the study, exactly where they wanted him to look. The window was open, muddy boot prints on the sill, an obvious trail. Too obvious. Jack closed his eyes, remembering Emily's training. She was smart. She'd know this was coming. Where would she go? The attic. Their emergency protocol called for vertical movement, not horizontal. Get above the threat. Use the angles. A whisper of sound from above confirmed his instinct. Jack moved silently up the attic stairs, weapon ready. Emily was there, crouched in their pre-planned defensive position. But so were they. Professional. Operators using her as bait, waiting for him. Stand down, Mr. Calloway, one of them said quietly. Nobody needs to get hurt here. Emily's eyes met his in the darkness. She gave a tiny nod. What happened next would be studied in tactical schools for years. Father and daughter moved in perfect synchronization, just as they'd practiced. Emily dropped and rolled as Jack engaged, using their own tactics against them in the confined space. But there were too many. They'd planned for his skill level, brought overwhelming force. A flashbang detonated, filling the attic with light and sound. Through the disorientation, Jack saw Emily being carried away. Professional, efficient. She fought exactly as he'd trained her, but these men had counters for every move. Dad. Her voice, frightened but controlled. Then another flashbang and silence. Jack regained consciousness minutes later. They'd used just enough force to disable him temporarily. On the attic floor lay a phone, new, untraceable. It rang as soon as he picked it up. Mr. Calloway. D'Angelo's voice was smooth. I believe we have something you want. If you hurt her, that depends entirely on you. You've cost me time, money, and credibility. Now you'll learn the price of defiance. A video appeared on the phone. Emily, unconscious but apparently unharmed, being loaded into a van. The footage was intentionally clear, meant to provoke. What do you want? For now? Nothing. Just watch. The videos we'll send. Watch what happens when people defy me. Then, when you're broken enough, we'll discuss terms. The line went dead. Moments later, another video arrived. Emily regaining consciousness, realizing her situation. Her face showing fear, but also determination. Training asserting itself even now. Jack's hands tightened on the phone. They'd taken his daughter, but they'd made a crucial mistake. They thought this would break him. Instead, it had freed him from all restraint. His next call was to Reaper. I need everything. Now. Already on it. Reaper's voice was grim. Tom slipped me the warehouse plans. They're moving her to D'Angelo's main facility. Security? Heavy. Ex-military. Private contractors. Local muscle. 3 layers of defense. Get me schematics. Guard rotations. Everything. Jack. Reaper hesitated. These aren't amateurs. They're expecting you. Good. Jack was already moving, accessing his hidden armory. Then they'll be looking the wrong way when I come in. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Jack checked his weapons with precise movements. They wanted the warrior instead of the farmer. They've got him. Emily would be proud of him, he thought as he prepared. She'd learned her lessons well. When they grabbed her, she'd left marks only he would recognize. Signs, clues, ways to track her. To smart girl, his girl, Marie's daughter. And now these men would learn exactly why certain pages of Jack Calloway's military record were blacked out. Why some missions never officially existed. Why his enemies learned to fear the dark. D'Angelo had wanted to break him by taking Emily. Instead, he'd unchained something far more dangerous than a protective father. He'd awakened a weapon. The phone buzzed again, another video. But Jack didn't need to watch it. His mind was already flowing into that cold, precise space where emotions meant nothing, and mission was everything. These men were professionals, yes. But they'd never faced anything like what was coming for them. They thought they were the hunters. They were wrong. In the darkness of his barn, Jack Calloway ceased to exist. In his place stood something else, something that had hunted men through mountains and deserts, through cities and shadows. Emily was out there counting on him, his daughter, his blood, and heaven help anyone who stood between them. The hunter was loose, and the hunt was about to begin. The maintenance van looked perfectly ordinary as it pulled up to D'Angelo's warehouse complex. Jack adjusted his borrowed uniform, ID badge hanging properly visible. The guard at the gate barely glanced at it, just another routine service call. 3 days of surveillance had revealed the pattern. Maintenance crews rotated through regularly, checking systems, performing repairs. No one looked too closely at them. They were part of the background. Loading Dock 3 is clear. Reaper's voice crackled through Jack's concealed earpiece. He was watching from a sniper position half a mile away. 2 guards, both distracted. Jack parked where he'd have a clear exit route. His tools looked standard: repair kit, equipment bag, diagnostic tablet. The guards would never know each. Contained precisely chosen weapons and gear. The warehouse interior was a maze of corridors and storage areas. But Jack had memorized every detail from the plans Sheriff Tom had provided. More importantly, he'd studied the guard patterns, the security rotations, the blind spots in their coverage. Through his tablet, he accessed the facility's maintenance system. A few careful keystrokes planted the software that would give him control when needed. The guard saw only a technician checking readouts. Emily's signal is still coming from the secure wing, Reaper reported. 3rd floor, east side, heavy security. Jack acknowledged with a slight tap on his earpiece. He'd expected nothing less. D'Angelo's men were professionals. They'd choose a defensible position, one they could control. The first real test came at the security checkpoint. The guard was ex-military, his eyes tracking Jack's movements with professional assessment. Didn't see any maintenance scheduled for this sector, he said, studying Jack's credentials. Emergency call. Jack held up his tablet, showing a carefully crafted work order. Environmental system malfunction in server room 3. Mr. D'Angelo gets upset when his computers overheat. The guard's posture relaxed slightly at the mention of D'Angelo's temper. He waved Jack through. Moving deeper into the facility, Jack noted cameras, motion sensors, guard positions. Everything matched their intelligence, almost too perfectly. They were expecting him. This was as much trap as prison. Through the maintenance access panels, Jack caught glimpses of the warehouse's true purpose. Hidden rooms filled with accounting records, secure storage containing weapons, a drug processing operation disguised as a chemical storage facility, and something worse. Through a ventilation grate, he observed a room filled with bunk beds and security cameras. Young women, some barely teenagers, watched by armed guards. Human trafficking. Jack's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This facility needed to be exposed, destroyed. But first, his daughter. The secure wing required another layer of deception. Jack triggered a small electrical fire in a junction box 2 floors down. As alarms blared, he slipped through the emergency doors in the confusion. Emily was being held in what had once been an executive office, now converted to a secure room. 2 guards outside, another watching through cameras. All armed with military-grade weapons. Jack checked his watch. Almost time. The lights went out. In the darkness, Jack moved. The guards were good. They maintained discipline, established defensive positions, followed protocols perfectly. It didn't matter. The first guard went down to a throat strike before he could raise his weapon. The second managed to click his radio once before unconsciousness claimed him. The camera operator never saw what hit him. Jack used their own security keys to open the office door. Emily was handcuffed to a heavy chair, but her eyes were alert, analyzing the situation just as he'd trained her. "You're late," she said as he picked the locks. Traffic was hell. Jack quickly checked her for injuries. "Can you move?" "They didn't hurt me. They wanted me in good condition for the videos." Emily rubbed her wrists. "Dad, there are others here. Girls in the basement." "I saw." Jack handed her a spare weapon. "But we've got company coming." Boots thundered in the hallway. The response team, arriving right on schedule. Jack and Emily moved to pre-planned positions on either side of the door. The assault team breached with textbook precision. Flashbang through the door, followed by a tactical entry. Perfect execution of their training. But the room was empty. Where? Did they? The team leader's question was cut short as Jack and Emily attacked from behind. His daughter moved exactly as trained, efficient, and precise. In seconds, the entire team was down. Nice work. Jack retrieved his equipment bag. But they'll have called for backup. About that, Emily was already accessing a computer terminal. "I wasn't just sitting here waiting to be rescued." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Fire suppression systems activated, spraying everywhere except their location. Emergency exits unlocked. "You hacked their system?" Jack asked, impressed. "They thought the handcuffs kept me helpless. Didn't notice me watching them input security codes." Emily smiled grimly. "I had a good teacher. They moved through the chaos using the confusion to their advantage." Guards rushed past, barely glancing at the maintenance worker and the young woman in his wake. "Jack." Reaper's voice crackled with urgency. "You've got a problem. Sal's here. D'Angelo's chief enforcer. The one who'd threatened them at the farm, who'd helped coordinate Emily's kidnapping." "Where?" "Coming up the east stairwell, and he's not alone." Jack checked his ammunition. "Emily, get to the rendezvous point. I'll handle this." "No." Emily's voice was firm. "We do this together." Before Jack could argue, Sal's team burst through the stairwell door. 6 men, armed with automatic weapons. Sal himself carried a combat shotgun. "Calloway!" His voice echoed through the corridor. "Did you really think we wouldn't be ready for you?" Jack and Emily were already moving, using pre-practiced tactics to split the enemy's attention. Father and daughter in perfect synchronization, just as they'd trained. The firefight was brief but intense. Sal's men were good, but they'd expected to face one operator, not a coordinated team. Emily's computer skills had given them every advantage. Doors opening and closing at crucial moments, sprinklers activating to cover movement, emergency, lights strobing to disorient. Finally, only Sal remained. He faced Jack in the narrow corridor, shotgun ready. "You've got skills, old man," Sal admitted. "But you're still just a farmer playing soldier." "No," Jack said quietly. "I'm a soldier who tried to be a farmer. You made me remember the difference." What followed was a brutal close-quarters fight. Sal had formal training, military or law enforcement background. But Jack had something more. The cold precision that came from real combat, from missions that never officially happened. When it was over, Sal lay unconscious but alive. Jack zip-tied him securely. "Dad!" Emily's voice carried urgency. "The girls in the basement, the guards, are trying to move them." Jack checked his ammunition again. "How many guards?" "6. Armed. They're threatening to kill hostages if anyone interferes." Jack's expression hardened. "Get to the security center. Lock down their escape routes." "What about you?" "I'm going to have a conversation with them about threatening children." What happened in the basement would fuel whispered stories for years. Guards who survived spoke of a shadow that moved through darkness, that appeared and disappeared at will, of an unstoppable force that disassembled their defenses like they were children playing at war. The girls were freed, huddling together in terror until Emily arrived to guide them to safety. Many were local, daughters of farmers who'd crossed D'Angelo, children taken as collateral for their parents' compliance. "Police are coming," Reaper reported. "Anonymous tips about drugs and trafficking. Lots of tips." "Good." Jack planted evidence in obvious places. Ledgers documenting D'Angelo's operation, computer files detailing his crimes. "Time to go." They were almost to the exit when Emily stopped. "Wait, the security footage. They'll see how we did this." Jack smiled. "Check your phone." Emily found a program running, one that had activated the moment she'd plugged into their system. Throughout the facility, digital records were being corrupted, surveillance footage scrambled beyond recovery. "When did you—" "Reaper's idea. He said any daughter of mine would find a way to hack their computers." Jack squeezed her shoulder proudly. He was right. Emergency vehicles were already approaching as they disappeared into the night. By morning, D'Angelo's entire operation would be exposed. The trafficking victims would be reunited with their families. Evidence would lead investigators to corruption at every level of local government. "We should go home," Emily said as they drove away. Jack glanced at her. "It's not over. D'Angelo's still out there." "I know." Emily checked her weapon with practiced ease. "But tonight we hit him hard, made him vulnerable." She smiled, the same cold smile she'd learned from him. "Let him worry about where we'll strike next." Jack felt a familiar mix of pride and sadness. His daughter was becoming a warrior, just as he had been. But she was also becoming something more. Someone who fought not just for herself, but for others who couldn't fight back. Marie would have been proud. Behind them, chaos engulfed D'Angelo's warehouse. But father and daughter drove calmly into the darkness, already planning their next move. The hunters had become the hunted, and the real war was just beginning. Victor D'Angelo's office was in chaos. Phones rang constantly as reports flooded in about the warehouse raid. Federal agencies were circling, following evidence trails that led straight to his organization. His carefully constructed empire was unraveling. "Get me Blackwood," he ordered, naming a private military contractor, known for extreme measures. "Price is no object." Within hours, unmarked vehicles began arriving in town. Men with hard eyes and extensive combat experience, drawn by the promise of significant payment. Their mission was simple: hunt down Jack and Emily Calloway, whatever the cost. In his patrol car, Sheriff Tom watched these new players arrive. His radio crackled with reports of suspicious vehicles, of armed men conducting surveillance throughout the county. Even his corrupt deputies seemed nervous about these newcomers. "They're mercenaries," he reported to Jack via secure channel. "High-end contractors, some I recognize from overseas work." "How many?" Jack's voice was steady. "At least 3 full teams, maybe more coming." "These aren't thugs, Jack. They're apex predators." "Let them come." Jack ended the transmission as another vehicle drove past his position, professional operators scanning for threats. Back at their safe house, Emily monitored police frequencies and surveillance feeds. "They're pressuring your old allies," she reported. Sarah from the diner was visited by two men asking questions. Hannah's family, too. Jack's jaw tightened. The mercenaries were following standard protocol: identify and isolate support networks, pressure potential sources of aid. They were good at their jobs, but so was he. "Pack up," he told Emily. "We're moving." They had prepared for this, had fallback positions and escape routes planned. As they drove through back roads in the pre-dawn darkness, Emily noted multiple vehicles converging on their previous location. "They're boxing us in," she observed, using classic search patterns. "Good." Jack checked his mirrors. "Let them waste resources chasing shadows." The mercenaries were thorough, professional. They established surveillance on likely refuge points, monitored communication channels, tracked known associates. But Jack had spent years planning for exactly this scenario. Their new safe house was a forgotten hunting cabin, carefully prepared and supplied. From here, they could monitor D'Angelo's operation while remaining invisible to conventional search patterns. "Reaper's here," Emily announced, watching their security feeds. A familiar figure emerged from the woods, using approaches only Jack had shown him. Inside, Reaper brought troubling news. "D'Angelo's gone nuclear. Blackwood's people have authorization to use extreme measures. Collateral damage is approved." "He's desperate," Jack noted. "Making mistakes. These contractors don't care about clean operations anymore. They're hitting soft targets. Sarah's diner was vandalized. Tom's wife received threats." Emily's hands tightened on her laptop. "They're trying to draw us out. And it's working." Jack checked his weapons. "We can't let innocent people suffer for helping us, but moving to protect their allies would mean exposing themselves." The mercenaries were counting on that, had positioned assets to respond to any appearance by the Calloways. The first real test came when corrupt police officers began harassing Tom's deputies, those few who had remained loyal. Anonymous tips led to traffic stops, searches, intimidation disguised as procedure. "They're pushing Tom to either turn on us or resign," Emily reported, monitoring police channels. "Trying to isolate us completely." Jack studied their tactical options. The mercenaries were professionals, but they had one critical weakness. They were fighting for money, not conviction. That made them predictable. Using pre-planned protocols, Jack and Emily split up. She headed to town, using her digital skills, to monitor and coordinate. He took a more direct approach, systematically dismantling D'Angelo's hired muscle. The first team of mercenaries found their vehicles disabled, communications jammed, carefully prepared escape routes suddenly blocked. Jack moved among them like a ghost, using their own tactics against them. "Who is this guy?" one captured contractor demanded. "We were told this was a simple intimidation job." "You were misled," Jack told him, before ensuring his unconsciousness would last several hours. Meanwhile, Emily implemented their digital warfare strategy. Bank accounts were frozen, communication networks crashed. The mercenaries found their support infrastructure crumbling as she attacked D'Angelo's organization at its foundations. But D'Angelo's response was swift and brutal. Sarah's diner burned to the ground. Tom's house was shot up in a drive-by that barely missed his wife. Professional hits disguised as random violence. "It's working," Reaper warned as they regrouped. "They're pushing you to make mistakes, to act emotionally. Then we change the game." Jack laid out his plan. "They expect us to be reactive, defensive, so we do the opposite." Emily understood immediately. "We take the fight to them." The next phase was precision warfare. Jack used his special operations experience not just to evade the mercenaries, but to hunt them. One by one, D'Angelo's contractors found themselves becoming the prey. Some simply disappeared, only to be found zip-tied and unconscious near police stations. Others were photographed meeting known criminals, their images anonymously sent to federal agencies. The smart ones took their partial payment and left town. "Half his imported muscle is gone," Emily reported one evening, monitoring communications. "The rest are demanding more money, better intelligence." "Good." Jack cleaned his weapons with mechanical precision. Now for Phase 2. They had discovered D'Angelo's vulnerability, his dependence on external contractors. Local muscle could be replaced, but high-end mercenaries talked to each other. Word was spreading that this job was poison, but D'Angelo had one card left to play. He took hostages, not just Sarah or Tom's family, but anyone who had ever helped, the Calloways. The message was clear: surrender or watch innocent people die. It's a trap, Reaper said unnecessarily. They'll have kill teams waiting at every hostage location. Of course it is. Jack checked his ammunition. That's why we're going to spring it. What followed was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. While mercenaries watched obvious approach routes, Jack moved through blind spots they didn't know existed. While they monitored digital communications, Emily fed them false information through compromised channels. Sarah was freed first, extracted, so smoothly her guards didn't realize she was gone until hours later. Tom's family disappeared from under surveillance, leaving frustrated contractors to report their failure. Each successful rescue forced D'Angelo to commit more resources, spread his remaining operators thinner. And in that spreading, they made mistakes. Emily coordinated from their mobile command center, using skills that surprised even her father. She had become more than just his backup. She was a tactical operator in her own right, combining his combat training with her own expertise. Federal agencies are moving in, she reported, monitoring multiple channels. D'Angelo's political protection is crumbling. Too many witnesses, too much evidence. But that only made him more dangerous. The remaining mercenaries were his best, most ruthless operators. They had nothing left to lose. The situation came to a head during Hannah's rescue. D'Angelo's men had taken Emily's best friend as leverage, thinking she would be the perfect bait. They were right, but not in the way they expected. The rescue operation was textbook perfect. While contractors watched the house, Jack and Emily moved through underground drainage tunnels they'd mapped months ago. While surveillance teams monitored windows, Hannah was already being led to safety through a neighbor's connected basement. "This is why you showed me those escape routes," Hannah realized as they drove away. "You were preparing for this all along." "Dad taught me to always have a backup plan," Emily replied, checking for tails. "And a backup for the backup." The message to D'Angelo was clear. His imported muscle couldn't stop them. His tactics couldn't predict them. His money couldn't buy him victory. "He's running out of options," Reaper observed as they regrouped. "That makes him desperate, dangerous." "Good." Jack began preparing for the next phase. Desperate men make mistakes. As if proving his point, federal agencies suddenly took intense interest in D'Angelo's operation. Anonymous tips led to surveillance photos, financial records, witness statements. His political protection evaporated as evidence of corruption became too blatant to ignore. "They're watching his properties," Emily reported, monitoring law enforcement channels, building cases, following money trails. "Then it's time." Jack studied their tactical maps. He'll make one last push. Try to end this before he loses everything. "The farm?" Emily guessed. Jack nodded. "He knows we've been protecting it all along, knows what it means to us." "It's what he'll expect," Reaper warned. "Exactly." Jack smiled. Grimly. "That's why it's perfect. The pieces were in place, the trap was set. Now they just had to wait for D'Angelo to spring it. The final battle was coming. But this time, it would be on their terms. Jack moved silently through the night, approaching one of D'Angelo's drug warehouses. Security was lighter than usual. Too many mercenaries pulled away for the manhunt, the perfect time to strike. Inside, he planted incendiary devices at key points, not to destroy, to expose. When they activated, emergency services would have to respond. Everything inside would become evidence. "First responders are 4 minutes out." Emily's voice came through his earpiece. She was coordinating from there. "Mobile command center, monitoring police and fire frequencies. DEA task force is already in the area." Acknowledged. Jack slipped away as sirens approached. Behind him, the warehouse erupted in light as emergency floodlights activated automatically. Fire crews would find more than they expected. Documented evidence of D'Angelo's drug operation carefully laid out for federal investigators. By morning, News had spread through town. D'Angelo's largest drug distribution center exposed. But more importantly, people were talking. Years of fear and silence were cracking. Marcus Wheeler, who owned the hardware store, was the first to step forward. "They threatened my kids," he told Sheriff Tom. "Said they'd hurt them if I didn't help launder money through my business. I've got records, receipts, everything." Others followed. The dam of fear had broken. Small business owners revealed protection. Rackets. Local officials admitted to taking bribes. Each confession encouraged more, a cascade of evidence against D'Angelo's organization. "His support network is collapsing," Emily reported, monitoring multiple information streams. "Local muscle is abandoning him. Even his corrupt cops are turning evidence." Jack watched through binoculars as FBI agents raided another property. "How's he responding?" "Violently. He's ordered hits on anyone talking to authorities." Emily's voice hardened. "But his enforcers are getting sloppy, scared. They had reason to be. 3 attempted hits had been stopped cold. The would-be killers left zip-tied for authorities." Jack's reputation had grown. An unseen protector, a warrior guardian. People whispered that crossing D'Angelo was no longer a death sentence. Sarah Miller, still rebuilding after her diner was burned, organized other business owners. "We're done being afraid," she declared at a town meeting. "The Calloways showed us we can fight back." D'Angelo's lieutenant, Michael Brooks, saw which way the wind was blowing. He approached Sheriff Tom with a deal, evidence of corruption, reaching state level, in exchange for consideration in his own case. "Smart man," Reaper commented when Jack reported this development. Rats leaving the sinking ship. But D'Angelo wasn't finished. His remaining loyal forces began targeting anyone who spoke out. Windows were broken, cars vandalized, messages left in blood and fire. The town's response surprised him. Instead of cowering, people adapted. They organized neighborhood watches, installed security cameras, shared information about suspicious vehicles and unfamiliar faces. Emily coordinated it all through encrypted channels, turning the community into an intelligence network. Every attempted intimidation was reported, documented, added to the growing case against D'Angelo. Local media, long cowed by threats and bribes, found their courage. The town newspaper ran explosive exposés on D'Angelo's real estate schemes. The local news investigated political connections that had protected his operation. "Look at this," Emily said one evening, showing Jack her laptop. An anonymous website had appeared, documenting D'Angelo's crimes, evidence, witness statements, financial records. People are uploading proof they've hidden for years. Jack studied the data. Can it be traced? Multiple servers, encrypted connections. Even if he finds one source, there are dozens more. Emily smiled proudly. The town's fighting back in ways he can't stop. Town council members, those not implicated in D'Angelo's schemes, began speaking out. Building inspectors suddenly discovered violations at his properties. Health department officials found reasons to investigate his businesses. "Death by 1,000 cuts," Reaper observed. "His whole infrastructure is turning against him." Even D'Angelo's international partners sensed the shift. Criminal organizations that had used his network for money laundering and trafficking began pulling out, unwilling to risk exposure. Jack watched it all from the shadows, intervening only when absolutely necessary. The town was finding its own strength, its own courage. His role now was supporting that transformation, not leading it. Sarah's new diner became a hub of resistance. People gathered there to share information, coordinate responses to threats, support those standing up to D'Angelo's organization. "Remember when we were all too scared to even whisper about him?" Sarah asked Jack during a quiet moment. "Now look at us, planning his downfall over coffee and pie." But the most damaging blow came from inside D'Angelo's own organization. His financial controller, Elizabeth Parker, approached federal authorities with detailed records of money laundering operations. His entire banking network, Emily reported, reviewing the data. Account numbers, transaction histories, offshore holdings, everything needed to freeze his assets. D'Angelo's response was predictable. He sent kill teams after everyone who YTZ had turned against him. But the town was ready. Neighborhood watch networks identified suspicious vehicles. Security cameras tracked unfamiliar faces. Would-be assassins found their targets protected, their movements observed. "This isn't just about us anymore," Emily noted as they monitored another failed hit attempt. "The whole town's become a battlefield." Jack nodded proudly. "And they're winning." The FBI established a permanent task force in town. State police increased patrols. Federal prosecutors began building cases. The wall of protection D'Angelo had built through bribes and threats was crumbling. Reaper brought more good news. His international suppliers are cutting ties. Too much heat, too much attention. His cocaine pipeline from South America is shut down. D'Angelo's remaining loyal forces began fighting among themselves. Accusations of betrayal flew. Trust evaporated. Men who had worked together for years now watched each other with suspicious eyes. Emily monitored their communications. Their panic-moving assets, trying to salvage what they can before everything collapses. But Jack knew the real threat was just beginning. D'Angelo was being backed into a corner, his options disappearing. Like any wounded predator, that made him most dangerous. "He's got one play left," Jack told his team. "A direct assault. Something big enough to restore fear, to show he's still in control." "The farm?" Emily asked. "The farm." Jack began reviewing their preparations. "He'll throw everything he has left at us. One final battle." Sarah overheard them talking. "You're not alone this time," she said firmly. "The whole town's with you." She was right. People were organizing. Supplies, sharing information, preparing to support the coming conflict. D'Angelo had spent years making them feel powerless. Now they were finding their strength. Even the corrupt officials were turning. D'Angelo's pet judges suddenly refused to sign warrants. Building inspectors grew spines. Health department officials developed conscience. "It's beautiful," Reaper said, watching another former ally turn against D'Angelo. Like watching dominoes fall. But Jack remained focused on the coming battle. D'Angelo was wounded, cornered, his empire crumbling. That made him more dangerous than ever. "Be ready," he told Emily as they monitored the situation. "He's got nothing left to lose now." Emily nodded grimly. "Let him come. The town's done being afraid." In his office, D'Angelo watched his kingdom collapse. Allies betraying him, assets frozen, operations exposed. Everything he'd built through decades of violence and fear, unraveling, all because of one farmer who refused to be broken. His remaining lieutenants gathered, waiting for orders. They could all feel it, the final battle approaching. One last chance to restore fear, to remind everyone why they had been afraid for so long. But the town wasn't afraid anymore. Jack Calloway had shown them how to fight back, and now there was no stopping them. The war was nearly over, but the final battle would be the deadliest of all. The farm looked peaceful in the pre-dawn light. Jack stood on his porch, scanning the horizon where he knew D'Angelo's forces would soon appear. Months of preparation had transformed the familiar landscape into an intricate defensive network, though none of it was visible to untrained eyes. "Last satellite pass showed 12 vehicles heading our way," Emily reported from the command center in the barn. "Mix of SUVs and tactical vans, heavy weapons detected. Estimated numbers? At least 30 operators." D'Angelo's emptied his accounts, hiring every mercenary still willing to work for him. Jack nodded. They'd planned for this. Every field, every building, every approach route had been prepared. Sheriff Tom had quietly evacuated the neighboring farms, ensuring no civilians would be caught in the crossfire. "Reaper's in position," Emily continued. "He says D'Angelo's with them, leading from the front." Desperate men make desperate choices. Jack checked his equipment one final time. "Status on federal response?" "FBI tactical teams are staging 20 minutes out. They'll move when they hear gunfire." Emily's voice hardened. "We just have to hold until they arrive." The first vehicles appeared on the horizon as the sun rose. Professional operators deployed in textbook formation, establishing fire positions and coverage zones. They were good, veterans of private, military companies experienced in tactical operations, but they were fighting for money. Jack and Emily were fighting for home. D'Angelo's voice boomed through a vehicle-mounted speaker. "Last chance, Calloway. Surrender now, we'll make it quick. Fight and we'll burn everything you love." Jack's response was to trigger the first defensive line. Hidden charges detonated under D'Angelo's forward vehicles, disabling them without causing casualties. The message was clear. They were fighting on his terms now. The battle erupted in earnest. Mercenaries advanced through the fields, using proper cover and movement techniques. But Jack had prepared for professionals. Motion sensors triggered targeted defenses. Pre-sighted positions became kill zones. Every approach channel was covered by interlocking fields of fire. "West team is pushing through the corn," Emily reported, monitoring multiple camera feeds. "They're trying to flank the barn. Let them." Jack was already moving. "Activate sequence, Charlie." The irrigation system suddenly burst to life, spraying not water, but a mixture that rendered night vision and thermal imaging useless. Mercenaries found their expensive equipment becoming a liability, forcing them to remove goggles and fight blind. D'Angelo's voice crackled over their radios, intercepted by Emily's surveillance. "Push forward. He's just one man." "Not anymore," Emily whispered, triggering another defensive sequence. Hidden speakers activated, playing recorded combat sounds that confused the attackers' coordination. Every radio channel they switched to was already compromised. Jack moved like a shadow through his killing ground. These men were trained soldiers, but he was a ghost, appearing and disappearing at will. One by one, mercenaries went down to precise, non-lethal strikes. "They're adjusting," Emily warned. "Second wave moving up with heavy weapons." The sound of automatic fire filled the air as D'Angelo's men tried to suppress the farm's defensive positions. But Jack had prepared for this too. Remote-controlled targets drew their fire while he circled behind their positions. "Victor's getting nervous," Reaper reported from his sniper perch. "He's ordering his reserve units forward." This was the critical moment. D'Angelo was committing his final resources, exactly as they'd planned. Jack gave Emily the signal. To me, Barnes' defenses activated in full. Hidden launchers fired smoke grenades, breaking up firing lanes. Emily's electronic warfare suite jammed communications, created false signals, spawned ghost targets on tactical displays. Mercenaries found themselves fighting shadows and echoes while Jack hunted them methodically. Years of combat experience, combined with perfect knowledge of the terrain, made him unstoppable. "East side breach." Emily's voice was tense but controlled. 3 men, moving fast. They were trying to reach the barn, to get to Emily. But she wasn't the helpless target they expected. As they breached the door, she demonstrated everything her father had taught her. The fight was brief, but intense. Emily moved with precise efficiency, using their own momentum against them. When Jack arrived moments later, all 3 attackers were down, secured with zip ties. "Nice work," he said proudly. "I had a good teacher." Emily was already back at her monitors. D'Angelo's losing control. His men are starting to pull back. But D'Angelo himself was moving forward, rage overcoming caution. "Burn it!" he screamed over the command channel. "Burn everything!" Incendiary rounds began hitting the farm buildings, but Jack had prepared for this too. Fire suppression systems activated automatically, special compounds smothering the flames before they could spread. "Federal response teams are moving," Emily reported. 10 minutes out. We just need to hold." D'Angelo's remaining forces were corralled now, hemmed in by pre-planned containment zones. Every escape route they tried led them deeper into prepared kill zones. "Your men are done, Victor," Jack's voice carried across the battlefield. "Surrender before this gets worse. You've destroyed everything." D'Angelo's voice was unhinged. "My empire, my reputation, everything I built." "You did that yourself." Jack moved closer, letting himself be seen. "When you threatened my family." D'Angelo emerged from behind a disabled SUV, holding a military-grade rifle. His expensive suit was dirty, his carefully maintained appearance shattered. "You have no idea what real power is," he snarled. "I controlled this whole county. I owned everyone." "Not anymore." Jack stepped into view. "Your empire's gone. Your men are defeated. It's over." "Nothing's over." D'Angelo raised his weapon. "I was special forces too, you know. Before I learned there was more money on this side." "I know." Jack's voice was calm. "Your record. Gulf War. Honorable discharge. Then you chose to become this." The revelation seemed to enrage D'Angelo further. "I built something bigger than playing soldier." "You built it on fear," Jack countered, "on hurting innocent people. Did you think no one would ever fight back?" D'Angelo's response was to open fire, but Jack was already moving, closing the distance with practiced efficiency. The fight that followed was brutal and swift. Two trained operators, but one had spent years growing soft behind a desk while the other had never stopped being a warrior. When it was over, D'Angelo lay disarmed and secured, his expensive suit now stained with dirt and blood. Around the farm, his remaining mercenaries surrendered as federal tactical teams arrived, their fight gone with their paymaster's defeat. "Clear," Emily reported from the command center. "All hostile forces contained." Jack surveyed the battlefield as dawn fully broke. His farm had held. The defensive preparations had worked perfectly. And more importantly, no one had died. Professional precision had ensured even D'Angelo's mercenaries suffered nothing worse than bruises and wounded pride. FBI tactical teams moved through the scene, securing weapons and gathering evidence. D'Angelo's forces would provide plenty of testimony about his criminal empire, eager to make deals in exchange for leniency. "We did it," Emily said softly, joining her father on the porch. "We actually did it." "You did it," Jack corrected. "Your planning, your coordination. I just provided the muscle." "Team effort." Emily smiled. "Think Mom would be proud?" "Very." Jack watched federal agents leading D'Angelo away. "Though she'd probably prefer we'd solved this with less violence." "Sometimes you have to fight," Emily quoted his own words back to him, "to protect what matters." In the distance, sirens approached, more law enforcement arriving to process the scene. D'Angelo's last desperate gamble had failed spectacularly, providing federal authorities with everything they needed to dismantle his remaining organization. The war was over. The farm had become a battleground, but it had held, just like the Calloway family itself, tested by fire, but emerging stronger. "What now?" Emily asked as they watched the sun rise over their scarred but unbroken home. "Now," Jack smiled. "Now we rebuild. Together." Behind them, federal agents began documenting the sophisticated defensive network they'd created. Soon there would be questions, debriefings, paperwork. But for now, father and daughter stood together on their porch, watching the morning light shine on fields that were truly theirs again. The battle was over. Peace could finally return. And the legend of how one farmer and his daughter had brought down an empire would be told for years to come. Early morning sunlight streamed through the FBI field office windows as Jack finished another debriefing session. 3 weeks had passed since the battle at the farm, and federal authorities were still piecing together the full scope of D'Angelo's operation. "Your evidence is solid," Special Agent Catherine Walsh said, closing her laptop. "Between the documentation you gathered and D'Angelo's men turning on each other, we've got cases against officials in 3 states. Half the county government is under investigation." Jack nodded, thinking of the countless hours Emily had spent organizing digital evidence. "What about the trafficking victims?" "All identified and receiving support. Your daughters detailed. Records helped us track down their families." Walsh paused. "Speaking of Emily, how's she handling everything?" The question carried genuine concern. Emily had been attending counseling sessions, working through the trauma of her kidnapping and the battles that followed, but she wasn't facing it alone. "She's strong," Jack said simply. Like her mother. The counselor, Dr. Sarah Bennett, had experience working with veterans and trauma survivors. She helped Emily process not just the recent events, but the changes in herself, the warrior she'd become while fighting alongside her father. "It's not about forgetting," Emily told Jack after one session. "It's about understanding who I am now, who we are." The town was healing too. With D'Angelo's organization dismantled, businesses reopened free from extortion. Sarah's new diner became a gathering place where people shared stories of resistance and recovery. Sheriff Tom worked tirelessly to rebuild trust in local law enforcement. Corrupt deputies were removed, replaced by officers committed to serving the community. The department's evidence room yielded proof of years of corruption, all carefully documented for federal prosecutors. "Never thought I'd see this day," Tom said over coffee with Jack. People actually trust us again, come to us for help instead of avoiding us in fear. Banks began reviewing loan documents, identifying cases where D'Angelo's company had altered terms after signing. Farmers who had lost land through predatory lending saw their cases reopened, their properties returned. Emily threw herself into helping organize the recovery efforts. Her technical skills proved invaluable in untangling D'Angelo's financial web, helping authorities trace stolen money back to its rightful owners. "You've got a remarkable daughter," Agent Walsh told Jack. "The Bureau could use people with her skills." But Emily had other plans. Her college applications now included essays about standing up to corruption, about finding strength in adversity. Universities were impressed not just by her academic record, but by her role in exposing D'Angelo's crimes. The farm itself became a symbol of resistance. People drove by just to see where the final battle had taken place. Local parents told their children stories about how one family had stood against evil and won. Jack focused on rebuilding, repairing battle damage, replanting fields. The work was therapeutic, helping him transition back from warrior to farmer. But he kept up his training, and Emily joined him every morning. "Just in case," she said, moving through combat forms with fluid grace. "The next D'Angelo out there needs to know this town isn't helpless anymore." Reaper visited occasionally, helping restore the farm while keeping an eye on regional criminal organizations. But none showed interest in moving into D'Angelo's territory. The story of his fall had spread, becoming a warning. The foundation was Emily's idea. Using recovered funds from D'Angelo's accounts, they established a support network for farmers facing financial hardship. Legal aid, emergency loans, counseling services, everything they wished they'd had during their own struggle. "We'll call, it the Marie Calloway Foundation," Emily announced. "Mom always wanted to help people. This way she still can." Jack found her one evening in the refurbished barn, training with the same intensity she'd shown during the crisis. But there was peace in her movements now, not desperate necessity. "Something on your mind?" he asked, recognizing her thoughtful expression. "Just thinking about who I want to be." Emily continued her forms. "I'm not just a farmer's daughter anymore, not just a warrior either. I'm something new." Jack understood. They had both been transformed by the crucible of conflict. The trick was finding balance, using their skills to protect rather than destroy. The town council meeting reflected the changing times. New faces replaced corrupt officials. Development plans prioritized local businesses over outside investors. Transparency and accountability became watchwords. "We're not just rebuilding buildings," the new mayor declared. "We're rebuilding trust, community, the things D'Angelo tried to destroy." Emily's friend Hannah started a support group for young people affected by D'Angelo's violence. They shared stories, helped each other heal, turned trauma into strength. Emily attended sometimes, sharing what she'd learned about courage and resilience. Federal investigations expanded beyond the county. D'Angelo's connections reached into state politics, corporate boardrooms, even federal agencies. Each revelation brought more indictments, more corrupt officials facing justice. The legal system, once twisted to serve D'Angelo's interests, began functioning properly again. Judges reviewed tainted cases. Prosecutors pursued genuine justice rather than political agenda. The machinery of law remembered its true purpose. Jack helped other veterans transitioning to farming, sharing not just agricultural knowledge but wisdom about finding peace after combat. Some recognized him from shared battlefields, understood the warrior beneath the farmer's exterior. "You showed us all something important," one former Marine told him. "That we don't have to choose between peace and strength. We can be both." Emily's college acceptance letters arrived, full scholarships to prestigious universities. But she chose a school close to home, planning to study law and cybersecurity. "Someone needs to protect places like this," she explained. "Make sure another D'Angelo never gets power here." The farm flourished that summer. Recovery funds and debt forgiveness helped restore irrigation systems, replace damaged equipment. The community pulled together, neighboring farmers helping with planting and repairs. Sarah organized a harvest festival, the first in years. People celebrated not just crops, but freedom from fear. Children played in fields that had been battlegrounds. Music and laughter replaced tension and whispered warnings. Jack watched his daughter move through the crowds, confident and capable. She had emerged from darkness carrying light, using her strength to help others find theirs. Marie would be so proud, Sarah said, joining him. Of both of you. Federal investigators quietly approached Jack about consulting on similar cases. Other communities faced their own DeAngelis, needed guidance fighting corruption and organized crime. I'll think about it, he told Agent Walsh. But my place is here. This farm. This community. It's what we fought for. Emily took on a leadership role in local youth programs, teaching self-defense and digital security. She helped kids understand the difference between strength and violence, between standing up and striking out. We learned the hard way, she told her students. So you don't have to. The Marie Calloway Foundation grew, helping rural communities across the state. Emily's technical skills and Jack's tactical experience proved invaluable in identifying predatory lending schemes and criminal enterprises. Throughout that summer of recovery, father and daughter maintained their training routine, not from fear now, but understanding. They had become protectors, guardians of their community's peace. Think we'll ever be normal again? Emily asked one morning as they watched the sun rise over their restored fields. We're farmers, Jack replied with a small smile. Just farmers, who know how to fight when fighting's needed. The scars remained, in the land, in their minds, in the community's memory. But scars meant survival, meant lessons learned and strength gained. They had faced the darkness together, father and daughter, had transformed their farm into a fortress, themselves into warriors, and now they were transforming back, not to who they had been, but to something new, something stronger. Peace returned to their valley, but it was a peace guarded by those who understood its cost, who knew that sometimes the price of peace was the readiness for war. The foundation stone for the Marie Calloway Foundation building bore a simple inscription. For those who stand against darkness, for those who protect what matters, for those who fight with courage and conscience. Words to live by. Words they had paid for in blood and battle. Words that would guide future generations. The war was over, but its lessons would never be forgotten. Golden autumn sunlight bathed the Calloway farm as crowds gathered for the harvest festival. Where tanks and tactical vehicles had once threatened destruction, children now played between hay bales and carnival games. The barn, once a command center, overflowed with music and laughter. Jack watched from the porch, noting how people moved differently now. Heads high, shoulders straight, no more fearful glances over shoulders. A year had passed since D'Angelo's fall, and the changes went far deeper than just the surface. Emily appeared beside him, her college textbooks temporarily set aside for the celebration. The Foundation's therapy group is here, she said. First time some of them have felt safe in a crowd. The Marie Calloway Foundation had become more than just financial aid for struggling farmers. It provided counseling, legal support, and most importantly, a way for victims to become survivors. Sarah said the diner's hosting another support group, meeting tomorrow, Jack noted. Your friend Hannah's doing good work there. Emily nodded proudly. Hannah had transformed her own trauma into purpose, helping other young people process their experiences during D'Angelo's reign. Her group had become a model for similar programs across the state. Local law enforcement looked different too. Sheriff Tom had rebuilt the department from the ground up, implementing oversight measures and community engagement programs. His deputies weren't just officers now. They were guardians, protectors of the peace they'd all fought to achieve. Agent Walsh called again, Emily mentioned casually. The Bureau's still interested in my internship application. And? I told her I'm needed. Here, Emily gestured at the festival. This is where change really happens. Small towns, local communities. This is where we stop the next D'Angelo before he gains power. Jack squeezed her shoulder proudly. His daughter had grown into something remarkable. Part warrior, part healer, all protector. She taught self-defense classes at the community center while studying law and cybersecurity, preparing to guard her community in multiple ways. The sound of military helicopters drew attention skyward. But instead of tension, people waved. The National Guard was conducting joint training exercises with local law enforcement, part of new programs to prevent corruption and organized crime from gaining footholds in rural areas. "Remember when that sound meant trouble?" Sarah asked, bringing them fresh lemonade. Her new diner had become the heart of the community, a place where people gathered to share stories and support each other. "Different times," Jack replied simply. Veterans, transitioning to farming, had found a haven in their community. Jack's combination of agricultural knowledge and combat experience made him an ideal mentor. He helped them find peace without forgetting their strength, showing by example how to balance warrior and farmer. Emily's college studies focused on rural justice and community empowerment. Her professors were impressed by her practical experience in fighting corruption, often inviting her to speak about grassroots resistance and digital security. "They're calling it the Calloway model," she told Jack one evening, "using technology and community organizing to identify and stop corruption before it takes root. Other towns are implementing similar programs. The local economy flourished without D'Angelo's criminal influence. Small businesses grew, farmers prospered, and the community discovered its own strength. The town became known for its resilience, its unity, its refusal to submit to fear." Reaper still visited occasionally, bringing news of other communities fighting their own battles against corruption. Each time, he found the farm more restored, more peaceful, but never defenseless. Jack and Emily maintained their vigilance, their training, their readiness to protect what mattered. "You've built something special here," Reaper observed during one visit. "Not just security, hope." The Marie Calloway Foundation expanded its reach, helping other rural communities resist criminal takeovers. Emily's technical skills and Jack's tactical experience proved invaluable in creating early warning systems and response protocols. Law enforcement from other jurisdictions came to study their success. How had one small town defeated organized crime so completely? The answer lay not in weapons or tactics, but in community solidarity and refused fear. Local schools implemented new programs, teaching children about civic responsibility and the importance of standing together against corruption. Emily often spoke to classes, sharing age-appropriate versions of their story. "The most important weapon," she would tell them, "is courage. The courage to stand up, to speak out, to help others stand with you." Jack found himself speaking more openly about his military service, not to glorify violence, but to teach about responsibility and protection. Young veterans sought his counsel, learning how to direct their skills toward defending peace rather than waging war. The farm itself became a symbol of resilience. Tour groups visited to learn about rural defense against organized crime. But they found more than tactical lessons. They discovered the power of community, of neighbors standing together against darkness. Emily started a support group specifically for children affected by violence and trauma. Drawing from her own experience, she helped them find strength in their stories, transform fear into determination. "We're not just victims," she would tell them. "We're not even just survivors. We're protectors now, making sure this never happens to anyone else." The town's economy evolved, embracing transparency and community ownership. New businesses required local approval, preventing outside interests from gaining too much control. The council implemented oversight measures inspired by Emily's digital security protocols. Jack watched these changes with quiet pride, seeing Marie's compassion living on through their daughter's work. Emily had combined his warrior spirit with her mother's healing heart, creating something entirely new and vital. Local media documented the transformation, sharing their story as a blueprint for other communities. "Small town defeats big crime" became "Small town shows the way forward." Even D'Angelo's former properties found new purpose. His warehouse became a community center. His office building housed the Marie Calloway Foundation. Places once representing fear now stood for hope and renewal. Security remained a priority, but it grew from community trust rather than force. Neighborhood watch programs coordinated with law enforcement. Citizens learned to spot warning signs of corruption. Technology served the people rather than controlling them. One autumn evening, Jack found Emily practicing with his old combat knife, her movements precise and controlled. But instead of the desperate intensity of the past, her practice carried the calm focus of a guardian. "Just staying ready," she said, catching his look. "Some lessons we can't forget." "Shouldn't forget," Jack corrected. "But we use them differently now." They maintained their morning training routine, though the farm's defensive measures were now carefully hidden beneath peaceful productivity. Like the community itself, they remained vigilant, but not fearful, strong, but not aggressive. The harvest festival reached its peak as evening approached. Families gathered for a community dinner, where Sarah's diner once stood isolated and afraid. Children played games in fields that had seen battle, their laughter healing old scars. Emily took the stage to announce the Foundation's new initiatives: scholarships for children affected by organized crime, expanded legal aid for rural communities, support programs for veterans transitioning to civilian life. Jack watched from the crowd, seeing Marie's spirit in every compassionate word, every determined gesture. His daughter had become more than a warrior or a victim or a farmer's child. She had become hope incarnate. The sun set over peaceful fields as the festival wound down. Jack and Emily stood on their porch, watching the community they'd helped forge disperse into the gentle evening. "We did good, didn't we?" Emily asked, softly. Jack nodded, thinking of all they'd lost and gained, destroyed and built. "Your mother would be proud." A car approached down the long drive, Reaper arriving for his monthly visit. But now his arrival brought friendship rather than warnings of war. The time for battle had passed. The time for building had come. "Ready for tomorrow's training class?" Emily asked, referring to the self-defense program they ran together. "Always." Jack smiled. "Someone has to teach the next generation to protect what matters." The stars emerged above their peaceful valley, watching over a community that had learned to stand together, to fight corruption with unity, to defeat fear with courage and love. The legend of how one farmer and his daughter had defeated an empire lived on. But more importantly, the lessons they'd learned and taught continued to spread, protecting other communities, preventing other D'Angelos from rising to power. Peace reigned in their valley, not the peace of weakness or submission, but the peace of strength and vigilance. The peace of those who knew how to fight but chose to build instead. The war was over. The healing was complete. But the story lived on, inspiring others to stand against darkness, to protect what mattered, to build something stronger than fear. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.